My name is Nick Womack. I am the owner of SBN Networks. And I have Mr. Jim Carpenter, the governor for the Republic of the Free State of Colorado. Is that where I'm at? Anyway, man, we are here. We have a lot of guests tonight, a lot of great things. It's been a kiddish show. And hopefully here pretty soon, man, we're going to be picking up our own network for the Voice of the Republic. We're working on that right now, man. So you can tune in 24/7, 365, voice your opinion, or do whatever you want to do, man. But right now, we are broadcasting from Forest Lake, Colorado. Correct?
Wonderful Western Colorado.
All right, man. You bet. I'm going to turn it over to Governor Jim Carpenter, and he's going to get going with everything here, and I'm just going to go outside, and I'm going to look at the people's sky and take a deep breath. How's that?
Well, you don't want to miss out because you're supposed to be learning right along with me. So.
Well, I am learning, brother. Yeah.
Stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of exciting guests on this show tonight. We're so thankful for you and the Nashville Indie Rock 101 Nashville and
the Voice
Broadcasting Network and all that you do for the people. And we're all in this together. And so, without any further ado, I'd like to get this show started. I'd like to introduce the President of the Republic of the United States, President Jim Jaeger.
Hey, Mr. Jim Jaeger, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing this evening?
We are great, man. I'm going to tell you what, right now, so many people are logged on right now just to the Voice of the Republic. There's like 10,000 people logged on to the Facebook link.
Awesome.
And not counting the TuneIn link and all of that, man. So that's a good start to the day. You know what I mean? So that means the Republic, the people are working, man, they're coming together and going to make it happen. I'll shut up, look at the sky, and you keep talking, Jim.
Mr. President, we yield to you, sir.
And I'll kind of repeat what you said earlier, Mr. Governor of the Free State of Colorado. But just a word of thanks to Mickey Womack there at the whole family there at the Indie Rock 101. And greetings to his listeners. It's a pleasure to address you this evening, and as it has been for the past couple of weeks for me. And I know Mickey's had several Republic guests on his radio show for the past month or so, and it's been a real blessing to all of us here in America. That being said, the Republic News Network, which is broadcast every Thursday night, is produced by Bob Barnett, and then Connect the Dots is also a part of that production with Dan Happel. But Bob is going to introduce Dan Happel in a few moments. But that being said, I have a message for the American people, a Thanksgiving message, and especially for President-elect Trump and the transition team, and that is to say, Happy Thanksgiving. The American people have much to be thankful for during this season of Thanksgiving. We just had an election in which the American people had a choice to begin upholding our law form or to continue down a path of lawlessness. In many ways, it was a choice between life and death. So we must be thankful to the Almighty for this door that has been propped open for the American people so that we might continue down the path of restoration of all things. And when I closed my State of the Republic address this February of this year, I stated the following, quote, "Who knows, the American people might be blessed to have someone with business acumen to serve as President and CEO of the U.S. corporation alongside the President of the Republic to ensure a smooth transition back to a lawful, peaceful society, one in which there is liberty and justice for all." Well, you can imagine who I had in mind back in February of who was someone with business acumen. Well, hint, hint, that was Donald Trump. End quote. I'm hopeful that President Trump will go down in history as the quote-unquote transition president. What do I mean by that? Basically, that he will work side by side with the American people to bring back constitutional governance to this country. In closing, we should all be thankful for the gift of the Republican form of governance gifted to us by our forefathers, and may God bless this republic. And that was by myself, President James Buchanan Geiger. Okay, we have an all-star lineup this evening, and Dan Happel is going to be your host, and I'm going to have Bob Barnett do the intros here. So,
yes, thank you, President Geiger. I am pleased today to say that back in March, Republic News Network had come on board a tremendous host who connects dots every single week. Dan Happel's Connecting the Dots program has been a tremendous benefit and has seen really great growth on the Republic News Network because he brings on people of stature, of knowledge, of absolute first-hand capacity to discuss issues that are tremendously important to all of us and to our pure existence and continued benefits aimed at the Republic. Dan is a very knowledgeable guy. He was first brought on Republic News Network back in 2015 as a guest, and he was soon discovered to be a very broad-minded, well-known, and absolutely factually oriented gentleman who understands where we are in history, what's going on in history, and what's going to happen if we just do our jobs, and that is responsibility. He's been our host of Connecting the Dots now since March, and I'm going to turn it over to him. He's got a huge lineup of those knowledgeable people I just discussed. Dan?
Well, thank you, Bob, and I welcome our guests and our listeners to our special edition, our Thanksgiving edition of Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and I would like to open this entire program with a discussion of the 5-minute rule. I hate to do that, but we are giving each of our guests 5 minutes, and I made this comment to all of them. Just pretend that you're standing in the Oval Office and you've got 5 minutes to make your case to President-elect Trump, and then you're going to be shown the door. And with that, make it as succinct and as factual and as hard-hitting as you possibly can, and that we think in 5 minutes that's an awfully tight soundbite for some of the broad issues that we're dealing with, but we feel that should be something that we can pass along to the President, because we know that at least one member of the discussion tonight is part of the Trump transition team, and we anticipate that there will be more that will be hearing this program. So with that, I will allow 5 minutes for each speaker, and I will announce 15 seconds before that 5 minutes is up that you have 15 seconds. And so finish up in that 15 seconds, because we will mute the call at the end of that 15 seconds, and that will give you the full 5 minutes, but that way we can get on to the rest of our guests so that we don't unfairly restrict what they can say. So with that, I would also suggest that our listeners are going to be hearing some terrific speakers tonight. I ask that you go to our past programs that are archived at republicfortheunitedstates.org. That's republicfortheunitedstates.org, or my website at danhappel.com to hear more of the extensive shows featuring the individual guest speakers. And those shows are all about an hour apiece. So if you like what you hear tonight from one or another speaker, please go to those programs and you can hear their entire thoughts on the issues that they're going to bring out tonight. So with that, I would like to start, because we're running a little behind already, I would like to start with our first guest. That is Ken Ivory. Ken is a legislator from the state of Utah. He is nationally recognized as a very knowledgeable speaker on the public lands issue. He is the founder of American Lands Council. And Ken, I welcome you to the show.
Dan, thanks for having me on. It's great to see you last weekend here in Utah. You know, we talked about a number of things, but very simply, with President Trump now taking over and the transition moving forward, the phrase that he uses, to make America great again, there's a very simple recipe to make America great again, and it is making Americans great again. Government exists in our recipe of America to secure our inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which we know is property, and the right to determine our own destiny. So to the extent that we get back to that fundamental recipe and we make Americans great again by limiting government to that fundamental role of securing our inalienable rights, we make Americans great again, we make America great again. Now, think about how to do this. Life, liberty, property. I was at Monticello a month or two ago, and as we're walking around that beautiful estate, the tour person, the docent, said, does anybody know one of the greatest things that Thomas Jefferson did? And I said, pick me. And she went on and said, it was the Louisiana Purchase. For $15 million, Thomas Jefferson purchased 530 million acres. And the Louisiana Purchase is recognized for not just changing the economic future destiny of the United States and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans, it changed the economic destiny of the world because it freed up people with liberty and property and the right to determine their own destiny. Those are sacred things in the United States. Well, think about what's going on today. Today in the United States of America, the federal government controls 640 million acres, more than was purchased in the Louisiana Purchase. 640 million acres controlled by a central government. In fact, John Kenneth Galbraith, noted economist, once said, where socialized ownership of land is concerned, only the USSR and China can claim company with the United States of America. In a system built on freedom, liberty, the right to control property, and the right to determine our own destiny. It's absolutely an aberration, and because of that, what are we seeing from this centralized Soviet-like collective farm management of public land? Well, we're seeing tens of millions of acres of forested lands go up in smoke, and with them, hundreds of millions of animals burned alive. They estimate between 10 and 20 animals per acre are burned alive for every acre that goes up in smoke. Last year, 10 million acres, just last year alone, of forested lands that are not managed, they're just left to rot, they're left to burn, went up in smoke. Now, under federal management, they don't harvest any of the trees. They're just left to grow and crowd each other out and die. We're burning forests and killing communities rather than using them productively and having healthy forests. We get lose-lose instead of win-win. Militarily, we've got more rare earth elements locked up between New Mexico and Alaska than any other nation in the world. Rare earth elements, we can't have computer technology, renewable energy technology, military technology without rare earth elements. And we're dependent right now on China for 95% of them. They're locked up all over these public lands that are locked off like a museum by the federal government. We have more recoverable oil in just Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming than the rest of the world combined, locked up in federally controlled lands. It simply doesn't have to be that way. We're sitting on the verge of an economic, environmental, and constitutional renaissance. And Dan, it's as simple as having the federal government honor the very same statehood terms with the western states that it kept with all states east of the Rocky Mountains. At one point, Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, Louisiana, that great western state of Florida, were more than 90% federally controlled for decades. They rallied and compelled the federal government to honor their statehood terms, to honor our fundamental promise of America, secure life, liberty, property, the right to determine our own destiny, and allow Americans to prosper. We have the greatest opportunity to make America again. We have the greatest opportunity to make America great again by simply making Americans great again, by honoring that fundamental American promise, honoring the same stated terms, relinquishing control over federal lands, and letting Americans prosper with their own control of liberty, property, and self-determination.
Okay, thank you. And our second guest on this call is Representative Judy Boyle. She is a legislator from the state of Idaho, and Judy was a member of the Helen Chenoweth staff, and she was also involved in much of the public lands issue and has written articles for Range Magazine. Judy, welcome to the show, and thank you for being our guest.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you, President Trump, for your courage and your truthful speech. You're exactly what our country needs after 100 years of heading in the wrong direction. My expertise is natural resources, and ranching is my heritage. I watched the Clinton administration firsthand with their destructive policies on their war on the West, and now as a state representative, I watched Obama administration continue their war. As we know, all new wealth comes from the ground, whether it is grown or mined. And when we are denied use of that land, our people suffer. You have just heard from Ken Ivory about the land in the West, 50% of it in federal control. Idaho is 62% federal and Nevada 89%. In timber country, when federal timber sales cease, logging jobs end, mills shut down, and businesses go bankrupt, rural communities become a shadow of their former greatness. In Idaho, there is one surviving mill south of the Salmon River. Companies which used to provide college scholarships have disappeared, and with them went the loss of bright futures and opportunities. Our once thriving timber towns have become reservoirs of hopelessness, with many remaining residents living on government assistance, their children drifting into drugs and dependency. Today, those few surviving mills still struggle as active forest management is blocked. America is now the world's #2 importer of softwood products. Today, we just burn up our forest instead of responsibly harvesting this remarkable renewable resource. Every year, we just burn hundreds of square miles of those unmanaged forests. The smoke blackens the sky and threatens our health besides the destruction of the forest. The entire West is really an ocean of burned, dead, and dying trees from this terrible mismanagement. There is such a stark contrast between the sick federal lands and the healthy managed state and private forests. Please come west when you have time. Let us show you what has happened here. Ranchers face the same attacks, with severe cuts in the number of cattle allowed to graze, and the nonsense regulations designed to drive them out of business. Those federal bureaucrats from thousands of miles away make arbitrary decisions for land they've never even seen, affecting an industry they know nothing about. Family ranches have been forced to sell to the federal government for pennies on the dollar, similar to those ranches around the Oregon Malheur Refuge. Each time private land becomes federal land, the state and the county tax bases suffer. Harney County, Oregon, where that refuge resides, is 75% federal land. Due to the lack of private or state land for grazing, ranches are forced to depend on those federal grazing permits to be viable. And most ranches were in operation and grazing that same land decades before it was even designated Forest Service or BLM. Ranches have federally adjudicated grazing preference rights established through the Taylor Grazing Act, which are taxed through a state tax. They're used as collateral on loans and sold with the ranch's private property. These ranches also hold state water rights on the federal landscape, which is a property right. Mining is a shadow of its former self. Most companies have fled America or sold out to Canadian companies. Regulations make it nearly impossible for them to operate, along with those environmental lawsuits which stop all business. Near me is a gold mining area that has produced millions of ounces of gold since the 1880s. 3 years ago, a company explored and found profitable amounts remaining. Over 300 local people would have been employed with very good paying jobs, but environmental lawsuits stopped them. The answer to this federal injustice, you just heard from Ken Ivory, is the transfer of those public lands to the states as promised. This would bring our states into full statehood rather than their current colonial status. Thank you again, Mr. President, for listening to our concerns. We stand ready to help you make America great again. You and your family are in our prayers.
Thank you, Judy. That was terrific. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your comments. Our next speaker is Debbie Bacigalupi. Debbie is from a ranching family in Northern California that has been dealing with the Klamath Dam issue for some time. Debbie is also a nationally known speaker on UN Agenda 21. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you, Dan, for having me. And during this thankful time of year, I want to express my gratitude for all these great people who are showing up on the phone and work so hard and diligently to make America great, even before that slogan became, such a modern day a goal, if you will. And even though Reagan had mentioned it, I urge you, Mr. President-elect Trump, to take that slogan and be the president who would make America great again. And President-elect Trump, I have a bit of concern today. I just read from the Boston Globe that you are considering that global warming made by human beings, by man, simply living the lifestyles that we do, is you're wondering whether or not it is causing global warming, and I have great concerns for your change of heart. And as someone who has attended the United Nations conferences, attends countless U.S. Fish and Wildlife meetings, whether it's on wolves or water or an endangered species or grazing rights or monumentalization, anything that has to do with rural America where my heart is, I've been to these conferences, and I know, and I can tell you firsthand with my eyes and my ears firsthand, that the science that they are using is not complete science. It's incomplete science. It is biased science. And as a president who says he wants to make America great again, the luxuries that most human beings experience, whether in the city or in the rural lands, most of it comes from rural America, where all the natural resources exist, where we cattle ranchers and farmers love the land and take care of the land. All the byproducts that come from rural America. When you sit in your Oval Office on the very first day, that desk, that wood desk came from rural America. The ink in your pen, the paper that you're going to sign things and make notes on, the sheetrock, the insulation, everything in your Oval Office came from our natural resources, and Americans being able to produce byproducts from our natural resources. And if you push this global warming climate change narrative, you are going to limit what we human beings, what we Americans can do. We are seeing now through the 2030 agenda regulations and limitations on life itself. They are coming up, they being the United Nations, and those who would push this narrative, John Kerry, Al Gore, the Clintons, people who you fought against to become president, people who would make millions, if not billions, off of climate change. They're pushing the narrative that we human beings, there's way too many of us on planet Earth. Trump, do you truly believe that? Do you believe there are too many human beings? And if so, President-elect Trump, then if we're going to, limit how many people there are on planet Earth based on global warming and climate change, then who do we get rid of? George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Louis Pasteur? Which great people who are transforming life would be impacted, and how would that impact future generations? Mr. Trump, I have great concerns that you're reconsidering global warming, climate change as an agenda that you must adopt in your administration. It is an agenda that is ridden with where people live, what they drive, where their kids go to school, what kind of foods we can eat, where we purchase our foods. Walmart right now is leading the way on something called the 2030 Agenda. In fact, businesses for the 2030 Agenda. And in Walmart's own report, it talks about taking over how they're going to work with small farmers on how to make sustainable food. You know what sustainable food is?
15 seconds.
It is GMO. President Trump, please look at the facts, look at the data, talk to people, scientists, Christopher Monckton, Myron Ebel. Listen to Myron Ebel. I urge you, President Trump, if you're going to make America great again, the agenda for the 2030 agenda, the new urban agenda, which is all based on global warming, is not about freedom. It's about limiting life on Earth. Thank you, Mr. Trump, for listening to our pleas.
Thank you, Debbie. Our next speaker is Paul Driessen. Paul is a expert climatologist. He is has been a speaker with the Heartland Institute in a number of different areas discussing the man-caused global warming agenda. And Paul, we welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Dan, and congratulations, President-elect Trump. As all of us here know, abundant, reliable, affordable fossil fuels are the foundation of modern civilization. They've lifted billions of people out of poverty already, billions out of malnutrition, disease, and early death. We must continue using them and encouraging other nations to use them so that billions more can take their rightful places among Earth's healthy and prosperous people. Developing countries cannot and will not stop burning these fuels, and that means atmospheric carbon dioxide levels will continue climbing even if the United States totally ends its own oil, gas, and coal use and hamstrings its economy and living standards in the process. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It is the miracle molecule that feeds plants and makes all life on Earth possible. More CO2 in our atmosphere means crops, forests, and grasslands grow better and faster and need less water. And And we still have centuries of oil, gas, and coal left. We must use them to make America great again and export them to help other nations improve their living standards. Someday other energy sources will replace fossil fuels, but we're not there yet. Wind, solar, and biofuel energy require vast amounts of land and water and raw materials to produce energy that is far less reliable and far more expensive than fossil fuels. They're competitive today only because they're heavily subsidized and exempted from endangered species and other environmental rules. Climate change has been real throughout Earth's history. The question is not whether carbon dioxide affects the climate or contributes to climate change. The question is whether human emissions have replaced or overwhelmed the powerful natural forces that have always governed the climate, and whether we are causing dangerous warming and climate change. And there's no real-world evidence that this is the case. In fact, average global temperatures have risen barely 0.1 degrees over the past 2 decades. Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets are growing. Arctic ice sheets are back to their normal stage. Seas are rising at barely 7 inches per century. It's now been a record 11 years since a Category 3 to 5 hurricane struck the U.S. mainland. The previous record was 9 years, set in 1860 to 1869. The 2016 U.S. tornado count is the lowest on record. A moderately warmer planet with more CO2 would actually benefit plant growth, wildlife, and humans with undetectable climate effects. A colder, CO2-deprived planet with less reliable, less affordable energy would be a disaster for wildlife, nutrition, prosperity, and Earth's poorest people. So here are some things we need to do. Number 1, reject, shred, and cancel the Paris Climate Agreement. President Obama signed it. America did not. 2, review the computer models, data, and other supposed science behind climate change and renewable energy mandates. Many of those so-called science facts are manipulated, exaggerated, faulty, falsified, or fraudulent. 3, suspend, defund, rewrite, or throw out regulations that are based on that junk science, especially the Clean Power Plan, Social Cost of Carbon Program, other anti-fossil fuel rules, and government grants for biased, alarmist climate research. Number 4, lease, drill, frack, mine, and produce our fossil fuel blessings, and build the pipelines and rail lines we need to transport them to where they're needed, end the riots and other obstacles that are blocking them. 5, review, reform, and terminate the crony corporatist schemes that subsidize too many renewable energy programs and enrich millionaires and billionaires at the expense of workers, taxpayers, and consumers. Number 6, end endangered species exemptions for bird and bat-killing wind turbines. All energy mining, pipeline, power plant grazing, and timber cutting projects must be treated equally under the law. 7, reform the EPA and devolve most of its powers and responsibilities to the states under a consortium representing all 50 state environmental agencies. 8, reduce the number of advisory committees at EPA and other agencies, and make sure they're no longer dominated by biased, anti-development, anti-growth activists. 9, prohibit, sue, and settle lawsuits, and suspend regulations based on them. And number 10, suspend, delay, and defund any rules and executive orders that are issued after the election in a tsunami of regulations until they can be fully and carefully reviewed. Do that, and we will revitalize our great nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was terrific. Our next speaker is Holly Swanson. Holly is an accomplished author and has been involved very heavily in the, expose of the transfer of our public schools to a collectivist system that does not work. Holly, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, President Trump, for your commitment to provide our children with the best education possible. And to that end, climate change education must be discussed. One of the most urgent and most important issues in education today is the misuse of public education to politically indoctrinate America's children, our future voters, to adopt revolutionary communist beliefs and goals under the pretense of environmental education. This is so very important. We basically have extensive documentation which confirms politicized curriculum such as climate change education, education for sustainability, environmental literacy programs, and curriculum such as social justice are being used to impose this communist mindset on our innocent children pre-K through high school. And as history has taught us, political indoctrination, if we lose our children to communist indoctrination, we lose our nation to communist rule. In order to provide free thought and preserve free thought and individual freedom, along with the democratic process for future generations, we need to address the issue of political indoctrination in our schools as a national priority. A specific example of climate change education and understanding where this is headed is vital to your decision, not only on education and making our schools great again, but also on the climate agenda. For instance, Portland Public Schools, which the Portland Public School Board is in charge of approximately 49,000 students, pre-K through high school. The Portland Public School Board recently, in May, passed a resolution on climate change education, which, I will read this, will abandon Portland Public Schools, the largest school in Oregon, a largest school district in Oregon, will abandon the use of any adopted text material that is found to express doubt about the severity of the climate crisis or its root in human activities. Portland Public Schools are abandoning the teaching of any text that questions man-made global warming. This is indoctrination. Science is based on fact and inquiry and more inquiry, not a school board dictating public policy by passing a resolution to indoctrinate students in a one-sided, biased political viewpoint. In addition, the resolution also, when you're thinking about where climate change education is going, the resolution was also pointed at redefining our economy. In other words, using public education to train children to redefine our economy, to call for an end to the fossil fuel era, dictating public policy to train children to vote for an end to fossil fuel era, the era when they're old enough to vote. In addition, training all students should see themselves as activists and leaders for social justice and environmental justice. It is imperative to understand what is behind climate change education. The education for sustainability definition of social justice is achieving equality in the distribution of goods and wealth among all groups in society. That definition matches the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency definition of a communist system of government. In other words, Portland Public Schools is pushing social justice activism, and you cannot push social justice activism as an environmental goal unless you are training students to be against our economy, our capitalist system, and our form of government. In order to redistribute the wealth and goods equally, you have to have a government that is prepared to seize and control the wealth. That has to come first. So you're teaching our children, America's children, our future voters, to support a communist form of government and to be against our form of government. This is not what public education was for, was designed to do in any way, shape, or form. And we have, under the pretense of environmental education, again, we have education for sustainability. We have the U.S. Department of Education pushing the Green Ribbon Schools program, which is advocating education for sustainability goals. We have environmental literacy programs and plans now adopted in 48 states to push this agenda through public education. You mentioned eliminating Common Core. Education for sustainability and some of these climate change goals are also being presented as new Common Core curriculum. We absolutely, one of the most important issues of our time and unprecedented in our nation is the takeover of public education by the environmental movement, and to have politicized instruction and teaching our children to be political activists for an agenda that mirrors Green Party goals and communism is nothing short of imposing the communist model of education in our schools. We Choose Freedom stands ready to assist you in addressing the issue of political indoctrination in our schools and returning our schools to safe havens of learning as a national priority. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you to achieve this goal.
Thank you, Holly. Our next speaker is Edwin Vieira. Edwin Vieira is a constitutional scholar and attorney and an expert on any number of constitutional subjects, including the well-regulated militia and sound money. Edwin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. In order to make America great again, President Trump will need to exercise to the fullest his constitutional authority as Commander-in-Chief of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution. The reasons for this should be obvious. The Trump administration must put into effect a large number of critical reforms. These reforms must be accomplished quickly, competently, thoroughly, and permanently, in the sense that their oversight and enforcement must be continuous. Each of these tasks is complex, requiring personnel with specialized education, skills, expertise, and experience, typically not to be found in only one governmental agency. Moreover, in the normal course of events, President Trump will not be able to appoint enough new personnel to the relevant agencies to perform these new tasks, as well as the other tasks already on the agenda of the agencies to which those agencies' personnel must direct their attention. Furthermore, President Trump will not be able to count on many of the professional bureaucrats in the agencies, who may be tainted with political disloyalty, obstructionism, incompetence, or other demerits. So he will need to set up specialized task forces fully manned outside and independent of these agencies, yet nonetheless capable of exercising the legal authority necessary and sufficient for the purposes to be served. Although this would appear to be a problem, it has a straightforward constitutional solution, namely, for the President to call forth from the militia sufficient people with the necessary education, skills, expertise, and experience to perform these tasks. All of these tasks involve fulfillment of the President's constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. And the very first constitutional authority and responsibility of the militia in the service of the United States is to execute the laws of the Union under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution. Now, the laws of the Union, specifically Title 10 of the United States Code, Sections 332 and 333, already provide the President with the necessary and sufficient authority to call forth the militia in the service of the United States. So President Trump would not need to ask Congress for any new legislation on that score. Because the militia are composed of most of the entire adult population of the United States, they embrace more than enough qualified people to call forth for any conceivable task. Because of their wide-ranging composition, the militia are not capable of being subverted or otherwise compromised to any significant degree. And employment of the militia to execute the laws of the Union can be self-financed through the militia, requiring no new appropriations from Congress. I have explained at some length how all of this could be accomplished with respect to three particular critical reforms, namely, first, repelling the invasion of this country by illegal immigrants; second, disciplining the banks and the Federal Reserve System; and third, properly investigating the 9/11 event and other criminal conspiracies that apparently extend into the highest levels of government. For the details on these and other matters to which the calling forth of the militia would be relevant, I urge my listeners now to read some of the articles that I have published on the website, edwinvieira.com. Finally, although for obvious reasons I'm loath to suggest it, I should add that Mr. Trump will also need to deploy the militia in order to protect him from assassination. Neither the Secret Service, nor the Federal Bureau of Investigation, nor any other agency deterred, detected, or stopped the actual assassination of President Kennedy, or the near assassination of President Reagan, or the attempted assassination of President Ford. And none of those presidents was confronted with as many threats as are being made today against Mr. Trump. Thank you, Dan, for the opportunity to make this presentation.
Well, thank you, Edwin, and I think that was a terrific segue into our next speaker, which is Mr. John McManus. He's the he was the president of the John Birch Society, and John is an accomplished author and a tremendous patriot in our country. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you. To Mr. Trump, I would suggest that he add to his goal of making America great again the following statement. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the U.S. Constitution. He should consider that were the Constitution fully adhered to, the federal government would shrink to 20% its size and 20% its cost. To questions asking what Mr. Trump intends to do after his inauguration, he should say, I'm not going to do as much as people might expect. Instead, I shall use all proper powers of the presidency to undo much of what government now does. And what I intend to undo, to abolish, are all agencies, departments, and bureaucratic monstrosities that are not authorized by the Constitution. Among the federal agencies that should be abolished are the Departments of Education, Energy, Interior, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and many of those issuing handouts of various kinds. I suggest to Mr. Trump that the U.S. military and the U.S. Border Patrol should take on whatever responsibilities have been assumed by the Department of Homeland Security. One by one, all agencies of the federal government that have been created and empowered by presidential executive orders should be abolished. The most egregious of these is the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, a monster created via an executive order written by President Nixon in 1970. The EPA was never even voted into existence by Congress. America has not won a war since 1945, when victory was achieved in World War II. We had no victory in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Why? Because our nation submits to rules and regulations mandated by the United Nations and its controlled stepchild, NATO. For this reason and many more reasons, the United States should withdraw from the United Nations at the earliest possible time. A measure to accomplish this, House Resolution 1205, has been introduced into the House of Representatives, and it should receive presidential support. Proper attention should be given to the very first sentence in the Constitution of the United States. It says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. That means no lawmaking is proper if made by presidential executive order or by a Supreme Court decision. Any law enacted outside of the legislative branch must be declared null. One good example would be the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, that has legalized the taking of 60 million lives since 1973. Presidential power must be employed to have a thorough audit of the Federal Reserve, something that has never been done in the Fed's more than 100 years of existence. Congress would welcome the help of the President to get this done. Once audited honestly and thoroughly, moves should be undertaken toward abolishing this unconstitutional engine of inflation. The path toward creating precious metal-backed currency should be laid out and followed. Various job-destroying entanglements in which our government has placed the nation should be terminated. This means exiting NAFTA, CAFTA, the World Trade Organization, and others. So let me say again, America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. Mr. Trump, I will continue to pray that you accomplish all your legitimate goals, only some of which I have recommended in this brief statement. And thank you, Dan, for the chance to be a part of this program.
Well, thank you, John, and I think that is probably the best synopsis of what we want him to accomplish. Our next guest is James Jaeger. James is a film producer and director, and he is currently has a project called Mainstream, which is a expose of the controlled media in television, the news media, and in the film industry. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Trump, the mere fact that you are hopefully listening to us over this network of phones and internet connections, when you know very well that every one of the guests that's on tonight should actually be on network television, should be on Fox, should be on CNN, should be on MSNBC, but none of these voices are being heard on the mainstream media's networks. And why is this? It's because the mainstream media is not serving the interests of we the people at all. So basically, I'm just going to cut to exactly what I think needs to be done. A lot of people look out there and they look at the internet, they look at all the television shows, they look at the History Channel, Discovery, Nova, Frontline, Today Show, Daily Show, Face the Nation, Access Hollywood 2020, Biography, O'Reilly Factor, and they think, oh, we have a cornucopia of diversity of entertainment and news out there. And then they point to the internet and they say, oh, look at the internet, it's got millions of websites and millions of links. The fact of the matter is, the mainstream media, which is basically dominated by 6 multinational corporations, controls 95% of the information flow to this democratic republic. And basically, when that happens, when you have these trolls on the bridge to education, news, and entertainment, you basically get only the point of view that the 6 conglomerates and their top 3 executives that run each one of those 6 conglomerates want you to hear, see, and read. Researcher John Cones posited once that movies are made basically to reflect the interests, values, cultural perspectives, and prejudices of their makers. This is true, and we have 6 conglomerates, Comcast, Viacom, Disney, Time Warner, Sony, 21st Century Fox, owning, dominating, influencing, and controlling 95% of the news and entertainment received by we the people, it's easy to see why you have such a hard time with the mainstream media, Mr. Trump. I mean, obviously, it's literally a miracle that you were able to do what you did. Now, also, obviously, you're a producer, and so you have quite a few years of experience with the networks and their games, and so you were able to outplay them, and I applaud you for that. But really, what needs to happen is we have to take a look at some laws. We have to take a look at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and we have to look at the Sherman antitrust laws that are on the books, because you can't have 6 conglomerates controlling thousands and thousands of production companies, media outlets, newspapers, and each one of these 6 conglomerates owns the major studios. Comcast owns Universal, Viacom owns Paramount, Disney owns Disney Studios, Time Warner owns Warner Brothers, Sony owns Sony Pictures, and 21st Century owns 20th Century Fox. And this is where the kids get their information. And all of these studios are basically dominated by a control group of 3 top executives that greenlight only movies that interest them. And this control group could be described as politically liberal, not very religious, white males of European heritage. Now, there are other demographics that describe the control group that you would be cited as a bigot if you mentioned that, so I won't mention that. But suffice it to say that if you have a narrowly defined group of people dominating the studios and the networks, then you're going to get a very limited amount of news. And basically, this is why we see endless pharmaceutical drugs, oil-burning cars, debt-peddling banks, sickness-exploiting insurance, brain cell-killing liquor, but we rarely ever see vitamins, electric cars, guns for self-protection, fusion, solar, or anything Nikola Tesla invented. We always constantly have pushed upon us Keynesian economics, but never Austrian economics, gun control, but never the militia of the several states, gay marriage, but rarely traditional marriage. The networks push socialized medicine, but never free market competition in the health industry. They push radical women's lib, but never stay-at-home moms.
15 seconds.
Basically, they are pushing the globalist agenda, and the mainstream media has to be broken up through the Sherman antitrust laws, and the FCC has to better do its job. And if you want more information on this, the movie project we're working on is at mainstreammedia.us. Help us get this movie made, because this is a large subject, and we have to work together. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, James. And our next speaker is Michael Shaw. Michael is the one of the, I guess, fathers of the Anti-Agenda 21 movement, and he has a group called Freedom Advocates, and we welcome you to the show, Michael.
Well, it's nice to be here, Dan, and well done today. In order to make America great again, I want to present to President-elect Trump information on a system called Councils of Government, or COGS. COGS were a system established by Dwight Eisenhower to build the national freeway system. While that might have been an expansion of constitutional power beyond the realm of the Constitution itself, the real problem is that over the last 50 or 60 years, COGS have increasingly increased their power to a point where today in California, they threaten to undo all local governments, county and city governments, and substitute in their place a regional system of government run by unelected powers that will control all aspects of local politics and development and control. At present, the San Francisco area COG, called ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, is planning a $300 billion, that's with a B, billion-dollar program to remake the Bay Area. Now, ABAG is the first of the COGs to take such an expansive view, but all COGs across America will be implementing a program similar upon the success of the ABAG program. Now, every area in America, other than a few federal land ownerships out west, are covered by a COG, a Council of Government. And what the Bay Area and other COGs are preparing to do is this. In the Bay Area, over the next 30 years, under the ABAG proposal, 90% of all new homes must be of a stack and pack variety within half a mile of a newly formed transit system. This transit system will substitute for automobiles and will be the way in which Bay Area residents will be able to get around. This will be trains and buses. And stack and pack means that you'll be living in high-rise buildings with no yards, no cars, completely monitored and controlled for the benefit of government information gathering. Now, the Bay Area is committing $300 billion, that's what it be, $300 billion to this remake of the Bay Area. As part of that program, major arteries will be closed to private automobiles and available only to public vehicles. This includes the El Camino Real, which runs from San Jose to San Francisco. It's a total remake of the Bay Area and a total redoing of the political system by which we operate. Now, if COGS are allowed to continue in this manner, Americans will find that we live under a new system of government with new requirements, new conditions, and totally expanded power without any local voting power remaining. If your administration, the Trump administration, doesn't undo the forward progress of these programs, America will be over. Now, a lot of people can say, well, that's happening in the Bay Area. In California, it's going to first happen here, and then the Southern California COG called SCAN will implement the same program. Following that, San Diego is destined to implement a similar program in coordination with Tijuana. You see, the COG program is very expansive. It's a worldwide effort at the core. And that's why, for America to become great again, America must reject this kind of a program. It must reject what California is doing, or we'll see it spread to the COGS. Florida, of course, making great efforts to do the same thing as the Bay Area is doing. So for more information on COGS and this program, I suggest you visit globalizationofcalifornia.com to get more information, and the public as well, so that we can begin to stand up against this globalist assault that is upon America today.
Thank you, Michael. And we will now move on to our next speaker, Elaine Willman, who is a Native American who has been deeply involved in the reservation, the tribal issues, and the water rights issues in the West. Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan, and to the colleagues I've heard so far. What a marvelous information base this is. This program is amazing, and you did wonderful work, Dan. And God bless you, President Trump, President-elect Trump, and soon-to-be President. I have a few suggestions that are essentially oriented around federal Indian policy and or related. The very first one that comes to mind is I would suggest that members of your transition team take a hard look at the Federal Election Committee and an old advisory opinion, FEC, Advisory Opinion FEC 2005. That's a 3-person appointed committee that made the decision that tribal governments are governments for purposes of receiving taxpayer funds and governing, but they are also persons for participating in America's elections. So 567 tribal governments may contribute with minimal accountability very big dollars to both political parties and or candidates or incumbents. These tribal governments, no county, city, town, or state government may participate in America's elections, and tribal governments should be on an equal footing with our other governments. The other is federal recognition of tribes. We currently do have 567, and the General Accounting Report from 2014, the GAO report, lists an additional 400 tribes standing in line waiting for recognition. And a former BIA commissioner just collapsed all the stringent criteria for recognition and wants to recognize 50 more tribes per year. So we have to ask the question, what is the state's economic carrying capacity? What's the carrying capacity of American taxpayers to fund all the basic needs of over 567 separate governments? And what is the negative impact, economic impact to the host states? This is getting so burdensome it will border or equate to the defense budget. Taxation. Tribal government land is tax exempt, and so are their businesses. This is a double standard, to a double advantage to tribal governments that is not translating to the improved quality of life of their members on reservations. It's also a double negative it has a double negative impact on the states and the people. The incremental erosion of property tax rolling across states, the plunking down of huge Class 3 tax-exempt tribal casinos in little communities that those casinos then siphon off the local disposable income and put tax-paying businesses out of business. Tribes should be given the choice of either tax-exempt land or tax-exempt businesses, but not both. This is so destructive of private sector jobs everywhere tax-exempt tribal businesses exist. This is incrementally corrosive and crippling to local economies, jobs, and states. Tribal constitutions. Were tribes and the federal government to follow tribal constitutions, we wouldn't be having these concerns. The Secretary of Interior approves each constitution, and every tribal government constitution allows them authority over only their tribal lands and their tribal people. Under the Obama administration, it has rolled out rogue, and federal agencies, all of the federal agencies, are delegating their authority out to tribes to expand governance now over non-tribal persons and non-tribal lands. This is devastating when most of the reservations across the country are predominantly non-Indian. They were opened up by Congress in the 1880s. Another problem for tribal members, and this is really dear to my heart, is because I am Cherokee, my husband is Shoshone, the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968 and the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. These sound wonderful, but neither of these congressional acts provide any enforcement mechanism or protections for individual enrolled tribal members or tribal parents. Indian Child Welfare Act gave tribal governments full parental authority over every enrollable child under 18. They have the parents, enrolled tribal members, have no parental authority in their tribe. Tribal members have no civil rights under the Constitution, and the Indian Child Welfare Act is used as a punishing tool to tribal families who may disagree with their tribal government decisions. These two acts have facilitated abusive tribal governments and muzzled or additionally punished their members. They must be rescinded or amended to ensure due process for enrolled tribal members who are U.S. citizens. The Downing, I really think it's imperative that the Trump transition team take a look at the Census Bureau. That's just one agency of the Department of Commerce, but it is humongous. And the irony is that the U.S. Census Bureau has constitutionally one thing to do every 10 years. But in 2016, the bloated...
Elaine, thank you. And now we will move to our next speaker, Debra Lamm. And Debra is a Montana legislator, and she is also an outspoken opponent of Common Core. Debra, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan, and all of the wonderful speakers that are on tonight. I see some common threads, and I'm so grateful that we have President-elect Trump or his transition team available and seeking our input, and especially as it regards to education and making it great again. I was pleased during the campaign that President-elect Trump recognized that the U.S. Constitution does not provide for federal control of education, and that he does want to change that. And I think we have some good options to do that. This is properly controlled by the states and does create the laboratory of ideas when every state has the opportunity to address education as it deems appropriate. You know, the move to control education from Washington began, over 50 years ago, and I think we can take it back quicker than that. We need to recognize that it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It really is a globalist issue, and the goal is to control children around the globe and to fit them into a human capital management system through the education process. Not only did we have Lamar Alexander back in 1989 moving for government control of children, it was followed by Mark Tucker, who was excited when the Clintons came into power. And both of those people, a Republican and a Democrat, have a very similar vision, and that is for the government to control our children. What we saw in the 2009 and 2010 administration is the move to Common Core, which basically is a Trojan horse, but was the mechanism to implement a national system of education. And it was specifically to undermine our sovereignty. And put us on par with the rest of the world. It was no longer about educating children. It is about controlling children and putting them into a plug-and-play planned economy. So if we want education to be great again, we do need to eliminate the Department of Education. We do need to get back to state control and go back to an education system and not about training and skills. It's wrong for our kids. It's wrong for America. I know that you've interviewed some people, including Michelle Ray and Betsy DeVos, and these are not people that are against the Common Core or federal education. And I would ask that you seek out people like Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who is a true champion of education. She is someone that has experience and has taken education from, in Massachusetts, from a low-performing state to the highest performing. She knows how to bring appropriate standards and would be able to assist you in eliminating the Department of Education in an orderly manner. And there are other people that would also be awesome, and I know you've tapped into Dr. Bill Evers, and he's another good person to consult with and consider. And I would ask you to take a look and put a stop to the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. It was passed last December. It was only reauthorized for 4 years. The current administration is writing rules that go beyond what the co-authors of that bill had anticipated. And remember, Lamar Alexander was one of them, and he is even shocked by the extent that the current administration intends to take over our children. So I ask you to take a stop to that. Please feel free to contact me at dlam@debralamm.com, and I will assist you in any way possible.
Thank you, Deborah. That was excellent, and I can say that you are certainly one of the experts on Common Core in the United States, and I know that you've been traveled throughout the United States to carry that word forward. Our next guest is a gentleman by the name of Patrick Wood, who wrote a fantastic book called Technocracy Rising. Patrick has been a guest on our program. He is an extremely bright man and really understands how technocracy is destroying our culture. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Good job so far. I reiterate all of the comments that have been made so far by and large, and I'll extend it just a bit further. And President-elect Trump will have to resist the urge to take on power that he undoubtedly will be offered from technocrats and from other agents of technocracy from around our country. There is a fifth column of actors moving in our country and around the world, indeed, through the United Nations and organizations like that, that has in mind the complete replacement of our economic system that we've known and enjoyed for well over 200 years in our country, namely free enterprise and capitalism. If our economic system is overturned, we will no longer exist as a country. This is indeed what has made us great. In the 1930s, a historic movement, Technocracy, was very concerned that President Franklin D. Roosevelt would rise to power and not implement technocracy in their day. A book was written, and in that book it said, Franklin D. Roosevelt was that man to whom should be given dictatorial powers in the approaching crises. Fortunately, FDR did not accept technocracy challenge, but they're knocking at the door again with a replacement economic system that will completely upend our economic system that has indeed made us great. I would encourage the President-elect to do several things along this line to block these people from gaining any more success in our country. Number one, dismantle the surveillance society that is so prevalent today within the administration of the Director of National Intelligence all the way down through all the 17 intelligence agencies that we have in our country today. I would encourage you to stop all spying on citizens without a legitimate warrant from a legitimate court. Number two, I would encourage you to block all policies emanating from outside the United States that are brought into the United States in order to subvert the Constitution of the United States. And this is your duty, Mr. President, to protect and defend our country from enemies without and within. These policies would exclude anything that seeks to implement Agenda 21, 2030 agenda, the new urban agenda that was just passed at Habitat 3, the big United Nations conference in Quito. Thirdly, I would encourage you to take control over the Department of Energy and instruct them to stop all subsidies on implementing smart grid around our nation and interacting with other countries in the world where our energy system could potentially be commingled or intermingled with other nations' energy grid. I have no problem, of course, with people, if they want to have so-called smart meters on the side of their home, that's their right. The product has been offered for a long time. But remove all mandates, federal mandates, to put these meters and force these meters to be put on the sides of home for the sake of collecting data on the homeowners therein. Fourthly, I would reiterate Michael Shaw's call for abolishing all councils of governments in the United States. There are at least 500 so-called COGS organizations throughout the United States today. By their own admission, they have radically changed their mission in the last 10 years. They are patently unconstitutional. They're imposing a Soviet-style level of government. And I might add, they are one of the primary instruments of implementing Agenda 21 and the 2030 Agenda, which stems from the United Nations. These things must be stopped if America will be made great again. Thank you, Dan, for a great effort.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That was terrific. Our next guest is Hank Vogler. Hank is a rancher from Nevada. He's also a very accomplished writer and has written a number of articles for Range magazine and a man of really exceptional common sense. Hank, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. And thanks for this opportunity, Mr. President. First and foremost, you must pardon Dwight and Stephen Hammond. They are nothing more than political prisoners. They are not terrorists. I want to talk about the H-2A program. This immigration thing, I hope, does not spill over into this. We've got to cure it. We've got to fix it. We've got to do something with it, but don't throw the baby out in the bathwater. 80% of the people that are working in agriculture today are Hispanic. We have an H-2A program, but only 2% of the people participate in that program. Yesterday alone, I filled out 18 pages. Today, I filled out 9 more pages. I have to go through several agencies to get my men up here from Peru, from Chile, and even from Mexico. It is unbelievable. These people have a tremendous reason to come up here. The disparity in our money and theirs is tremendous, and they can come up here, take minimum wage jobs, and live large in their own country with that money. They make more money in 1 3-year contract than they can in their adult life at home. But with the agency's burdens, nobody uses it. They steal my sheep herder. They have recruiters and coyotes that go around and make these people illegals. They go to dairies. They go into gardening. Maryland, right across the river from Washington, D.C., is full of runaway Peruvians. I become their free agent that brings them up here for nothing. I pay for their visa. I pay for their transportation. I pay for everything. And some of them get here, and I have very many loyal, good employees. But some of them come up here for nefarious reasons only to run away. And I can't hardly blame my fellow agricultural people. If you go through all of the bureaucracies that you have to deal with, all the regulation nation that you have to choke down, you can see why they do it. You want to stop this and send these people home that get caught. You need to have a private agency to do this. And there has to be consequences to them breaking their contracts. No more free rides. It's just, ag must have reliable help, and we don't have it. We have 94 million people on subsistence. They're not going to take these minimum wage jobs. But somebody across the border in Mexico with a minimum wage job can make more money in 1 day than they can in a month in Mexico. And so far, there's been no consequences to crossing that border. If you enforce the laws and get a good and promising H-2A program to bring in these guest workers and keep track of them through private industry and through private example, you won't have to build a wall. They'll tear the wall down going back home. That's the whole crux of the matter. You've got to have an orderly fashion to bring them in legally. And I am participating in that program. I hire no illegals, and I am being punished as we speak to jump through hoops from wage and hour divisions to housing inspections. I pass all of these things, but the burden is huge. And we have to have people, because agricultural products are perishable. I produce 2 million protein meals and 40,000 uniforms for our troops annually out of brush and browse that's inedible by practically any animal other than sheep and my cattle. And they produce on the Department of Interior's Bureau of Land Management and USDA's Forest Service. And the rules and regulations are knee-deep. And you throw that in with the Department of Labor, Immigration, Housing, not housing, it's at Homeland Security, and all these other things. It's absolutely insane. But don't take that away from us. You want to see this country, you can do a lot of things. You don't have to go to Disneyland. You don't have to go to Las Vegas. But if your belly button bangs into your backbone, you starve to death. And you want to destroy, there's only 0.5% of the people left in this country still producing for the rest of this country and into the export market. And it can be destroyed in a heartbeat, and one of those heartbeats, because it's perishable, if we lose our H-2A program, we need it reformed. Please reform it, but don't take it away from us by accident, because the mandate is send the illegals home. That's great.
15 seconds.
The ones that want to come here legally and work on a guest worker program and take their money home, we need them, we need them, we need them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hank. And our next speaker is Jeff Wright. Jeff is an accomplished author. He has worked in the national security effort. And Jeff, you are welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity. I guess if I was in a position to actually advise President-elect Trump, I'd have him focus like a laser light on one issue alone at this point, and that is the coming fiscal and financial implosion. With the debt overhang that exists worldwide and the global bond market in turmoil like it is, it should be obvious that between that and the breakdown of the international monetary regime, that virtually every other that this item and this item alone overwhelms and rolls up to virtually every other aspect or issue that was brought up by the previous speakers. If the federal government simply cannot gain control of its fiscal house and interests of central banking system worldwide, and the Federal Reserve System continues to inject literally trillions and trillions of dollars of fake money into the system, when that system finally gives way, that entire edifice, all of these other issues are literally going to be rolled over. So my advice at this point would be to convene a panel at this point of primarily folks that are not in the monetarist camp, not in the Keynesian camp, but are in fact in the Austrian economics camp, and begin a true look at the dissolution of the Federal Reserve and the pay down or either hard default on the existing debt. Until the debt trap that we're in right now is liquidated, I don't see any way that any of the other issues can be dealt with, whether it's infrastructure spending, public lands, the excessive abuses of the various federal agencies. All of them are going to be rolled up into the fiscal implosion of the federal government. Sometime during the next term, these issues that have been riding below the surface in governments from Europe to Asia to North America, and are currently already in the course of imploding in South America, those issues are going to take precedence over everything else. And if we're not ready in the States, if we're not ready in business-wise, personal finance, people are going to be hit with a shockwave like they've never seen before. We know that in his first term, and probably beginning almost immediately, that the zero interest rate and the negative interest rate policies have brought monetary policy to a complete standstill. There is literally no maneuvering room left for the Federal Reserve or any of the central banks. So at this point, if we cannot gain control of those institutions and in fact begin their resolution across the international monetary regime that exists, we will be hit with the shockwave with no way to control it in any manageable way. So my best advice to President-elect Trump would be to focus immediately on that issue and realize that The globalists, as people call them, are most likely to begin right there to collapse the global economy during the next year. So that politically, between now and the 2018 midterms, he probably has only 2 years of open field running with which to address that central problem in some way, whether it's through debt reduction, deficit reduction, monetary reform, beginning the audit of the Federal Reserve, beginning the audit and / dissolution of the Federal Reserve, and begin the complete restructuring of the existing monetary system so that an open, competitive monetary system can begin to replace it with actual free market currencies. You know, it's of historical interest to me that people talk about the free market, yet we don't have free market currency, all of which is controlled by political considerations within each country. So if we don't get control of these things, I think they will overwhelm virtually every other issue, and I would urge President-elect Trump to immediately focus on this as the key and central problem, without which none of the other problems will be solved. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And our next speaker will be Mr. Jim Beers. Jim is was with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He is the whistleblower that blew the cover of the transfer of $50 million from the Pittman-Robertson Fund into the reintroduction of Canadian gray wolves into Yellowstone Park. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for inviting me on. Give me this opportunity. I'd like to tell President Trump and his appointees that I've just spent the last 16 years since my retirement writing articles and speaking to and actually going and spending time with ranchers, loggers, dog owners, hunters, beach users all over the country. And they've got problems, big problems, with the environmental laws that these agencies are using to oppress them. I've seen them destroying power, timber production, mining, grazing, recreation, agriculture, and all the associated businesses and taxes associated with them. And I'd like to say that I think you want to unleash rural America to do what you want to do, which is to grow jobs and grow the economy. And what I've seen is that acts like the Endangered Species Act, the Refuge System Act, the Forest Service Organic Act, all of these BLM activities, NPS activities, Wilderness Act, scenic and historic declarations are being used by these bureaucrats to grow federal power at the expense of state authority and at the expense of rural America. And rural America is really drying up and just decaying right before our eyes. And I have found over 16 years that you can't really reduce the regulations and get anywhere. That's like taking an aspirin for disease. It's a short-term thing because bureaucrats use regulations like Play-Doh. They can make them big, they can make them small to do the same thing. They can have a lot of them or just a few of them and still ensure that they can go into any state and ruin rural economies at their will. And I found that you can't really amend the laws because nobody wants to do that. Even a lot of the rural folks say, well, we need this native ecosystem and blah, blah, blah. And the ones that aren't being harmed by logging, think, oh, well, it's not too bad. And the ones that aren't being harmed by the grazing shutdown think it's not too bad. So they won't support amending them, and they won't support repealing them. So what are you going to do? You can't reduce regulations and get anywhere. That's just you're just treating the symptoms is all you're doing there. I think what you've got to do is pass a law in Washington, President and the House and the Senate right now can do it, that limits the authority that they created out of congressional and presidential desires for whatever over the last 40 years, since the 70s, to do these things. The stuff that they're doing, endangered species, animal welfare, wild horses and burro, land and water conservation, even EPA, are not things that are done to enforce a treaty. They're done because the Congress and the President passed them as a law that they thought would please people, and it pleased a lot of urban people and a lot of rural people that haven't yet been affected, although more are being affected all the time. You got to limit it. How would you do that? You pass a law that says any federal program, activity, or action under these laws, and then you list them. Have a discussion about the Endangered Species Act, the Wild Horses and Burro Act, the National Park Service Act, the Forest Service Organic Administration Act, the Animal Welfare Act. None of those should justify any action or any federal expenditure in any state where the state government has not consented to it on an annual basis. It opens up a dialogue with the governors, and a lot of those governors are going to say, are you kidding me? We don't want this stuff in here anymore because it's hurting our people. And they'll put it out. Others are going to deal with them and change the way the federal government does things about creating stuff about wolves, and you've got to have grizzly bears, and you've got to have free-roaming buffalo, and all these other things that destroy agriculture and are dangerous and destructive in these communities. And if the governors have something to say about it, they can do it on a short-term basis. It doesn't have to be a big deal. But most of those states are going to say they don't want them in there. And that's going to cut down on federal spending and federal power for the long run. And it's going to do what you want to do, which is restore America's rural economics and rural communities and rural government to increase taxes and increase America to make it great again, like you've been talking about. And I think if you give the governors that authority to okay or tell them no each year about what they're going to do on those refuges that they've been buying and all those national forests they've got there and the national park system places that they've got in there that they've used as sort of islands to put out easements and to destroy access to certain places, I think you can do it. So anyhow, thanks very much for the time, and I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Jim. I appreciate your insights. I know that rural America appreciates them too. Our next speaker is Alex Newman. Alex is an accomplished writer. He is a writer for the New American Magazine, and he is also a book author of a book called. And Alex, you're going to have to educate. Crimes of the Educators. I'm sorry that I messed that up. Anyway, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan, and thanks to all the previous guests and experts who provided just wonderful ideas. If all those things were to be done, America would definitely be great again. I have no doubt about it, and I want to strongly add my own voice to the voice of all those who've spoken before me. Just great ideas. I'll elaborate a little bit more on the education, and then after that I'll get to globalism. Trump said on the campaign trail that he would like to eliminate the Department of Education. That is a wonderful idea, and it's a good time to get the process started right now. Put a Secretary of Education in there just to oversee the winding up of this monstrosity. And as long as they're in there, they might as well go around and tell everybody that the reason we have an illiteracy crisis in the United States has been well known for more than 150 years. This whole word method, which produces illiteracy, which produces lifelong reading handicaps, which produces dyslexia, and all kinds of other problems, needs to go. Unfortunately, it's part of the Common Core. Trump said he was going to try to get rid of Common Core, and that would be a wonderful idea, and getting rid of this quack reading methodology would do wonders. And there's a very specific reason why the education establishment, why the insiders have promoted this quackery, because they know that an illiterate public is a public that's much easier to control and manipulate. A public that can't read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bible is a public that is much easier to deceive and to dupe, and so we need to do something about that. And, it's outside federal jurisdiction, and I think that's a good thing, but you have a powerful bully pulpit, and whoever you appoint to oversee the winding down of the Education Department can use that time to encourage local governments to teach reading the way that it always has been taught until Horace Mann brought in this quackery. Another key point on your campaign was that Americanism, not globalism, was going to be our credo. I love it. It's time that America stop promoting globalism around the world. The best single thing that we could do to stop globalism and globalists in their tracks would be an exit, an American exit from the United Nations. So we can follow the lead of the British. We don't even need a national referendum. Just to have Congress pass the American Sovereignty Restoration Act, get us out of the United Nations, sever all of our ties with this UN apparatus and all these sub-bureaucracies, get us out of all these treaties and conventions and instruments, the Paris Agreement, and all this other nonsense, prohibit any U.S. troops from ever serving under UN command again, and basically wind up the United Nations, evict their headquarters from U.S. soil, tell the diplomats, you have X amount of time to get out of here and pay all your parking tickets, and that's the end of it. And just that one act alone, getting the United States out of the United Nations, would set the globalists back decades or generations. I think the American people would be very strongly supportive of that, especially if you explain to them all the evil that the United Nations has been perpetrating, whether we're talking about the climate hoax. You quite accurately characterize it as a hoax. Don't soften your stance on that. The American people know this. If you look at the polls, the Pew survey came out in late 2014, and after years of propaganda in the schools and in the media, only 40% of Americans believe the man-made global warming theory. So the public is on your side. Don't believe the lying media that try to stop you at every opportunity. They are manufacturing a phony reality. The American people don't buy it, and you should stand firm on your pledge to stop the global warming alarmism and to stop the UN Paris Agreement. And, as long as we're talking about getting out of international institutions, leaving the UN is, of course, should be a very high priority. You described it as not a friend of the United States, not a friend of freedom. It's exactly right. The UN is the opposite of a friend of freedom. It is an enemy of freedom, and it is an enemy of the United States and our national independence. It should be thrown out, and they can go set up headquarters in Havana or Pyongyang or Tehran or wherever they want, somewhere outside of our country so that their terrorists and spies can't come over here under diplomatic immunity. Then we can get out of Interpol, which is now taken over by a communist Chinese agent. We can get out of the IMF and the World Bank and all these other globalist institutions that have absolutely no business dictating policy to the American people or to anyone else for that matter. And so we can call it an M exit. We can get out of all of these things and restore American independence, restore American sovereignty, and eliminate this globalist control over the policymaking apparatus in the United States. And presumably that would be a benefit to all of humanity because this whole entire thing would collapse. So, again, I urge you very strongly to live up to your campaign pledges of stopping globalism, promoting Americanism, abolish the Department of Education, restore local control, promote phonics, and get us out of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. That was terrific. Our next speaker is Mr. G. Edward Griffin, an accomplished author. I refer to Mr. Griffin as the patriarch of the Liberty Movement. And, Ed, welcome to the program.
Unmuted? What do you mean?
Ed, are you there?
This is Paul Vallely.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Paul, why don't you go ahead and speak? It sounds like Ed, we'll put him on right after you.
Okay, that's fine, Dan. What would you like me to talk about?
Well, talk about what you want the president to understand is the most important thing that you can bring to him.
Well, the most important thing, I was with General Flynn last week and Mike Huckabee and Dr. Gorka in Florida. And the thing now we have to realize, there's so much in a transition. The key thing is lining up the transition team now. So everybody should be very patient. They're doing their homework. He's in good hands with Kellyanne and Steve. The General Flynn is helping a great deal now as they form this transition. A lot of presidential electees have not even formed their team in the fourth or fifth week. So everybody's a little too impatient. Everybody's worried now about the announcement coming out about Hillary Clinton. She's not important right now. The FBI and the new Attorney General will worry about the violations that she's made. So in that regard, Dan, we're going to enjoy a happy Thanksgiving here. We're looking forward to the new Secretary of Defense designation. We hope it's General Mattis. We hope that a new Secretary of State will be announced soon. Looks like Ben Carson's back in the fold. So I'm working with the transition team to a great degree, primarily on the Middle East, Syria, and new relations with Russia. But there's a lot there. We've got January the 20th as Inauguration Day. The transition task forces will be on top of a lot of the things that the callers have talked about tonight. But there's a priority. It's a Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 priorities. But you have to get the people in place first to make all of these things happen. And, of course, as you may know, I gave President-elect Trump the American First theme. And part of that theme was all the things that we need to do, getting rid of the Federal Reserve, recommending the United Nations be moved to Athens, Greece. We have to look at the strategy to defeat ISIS and protect our borders. And so those are critical things that will be done, along with a number of executive orders that will be rescinded by Trump in the first 24 to 48 hours. So let's all be patient. I'll relay the things that I've heard this evening, Dan. Anything else you'd like me to comment on?
General Vallely, we want to thank you for being on top of the things that are going on right now with the transfer of power in the transition team, and we hope you will keep us posted and keep them posted on our group and what we are trying to accomplish to bring back the greatness of America. And thank you for your part in that role. We will move on. G. Edward Griffin, are you on the call yet?
Hey, Dan, this is Chuck Floyd. I'm ready.
Okay, we'll move on to Chuck Floyd. I wanted to get G. Edward Griffin on, but Chuck, why don't you go ahead and move forward with your part of this? Chuck is a national security expert, and he has been working on the border security issue. Chuck, welcome to the program.
Okay, thank you. As everyone knows, the number one issue for President-elect Trump is securing our border. And so I've been writing articles and helping them with the border security plan ever since President-elect Trump started running. As you know, the United States has over 5,500 miles of border with Canada and has almost 2,000 miles with Mexico. And so there are 10 key points for the border security plan. I'm going to start off by the fiscal barrier of the plan. And so along the 2,000 miles, there are 12 border sectors, and so we have to really come in and enhance each border sector. And you're going to need command and holding and processing centers for each 100 miles. And so what I've done is I've written it where each 100 miles is a design build by a different contractor. And a PMO, a project management office, would be run by a veteran business, can manage the entire process across the southern border. And so you can have contractors build 100 miles or 50 miles. It depends upon how much interest we get within the contracting community. And each of the contractors would have to do the following things. Again, we have to make sure we have the command centers, the holding and processing centers for each 100 miles. We would make sure that we have the physical barrier, which is the concertina wire. Then you have a vehicle barrier. Then you have your fence. And I've been in Israel and the Middle East a lot, and so I've faced this on what the Israelis do. You have a fence, then you have a paved road, so CBP can go down that particular road. Then you have another fence, another vehicle barrier, and more concertina wire. And so these kind of things will help the physical area. Now, you need a layered security, which will also include cameras, which will see individuals coming both night and day. Also, you'll need a seismic technology so that the border, you can manage the border and you can tell when people are walking, running, you can tell for ultralights, you can tell for tunnels. All these things, we have the technology, they just have to be integrated into the layered security system, which CBP does not have because they have not been really effective in trying to stop all the illegals and the drugs and the criminals coming across the border. And besides that, you'll need vehicles, you'll need UAVs, you'll need helicopter support, and also you'll need some fast boats along the Rio and the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. Also, you will need a lot of weaponry because the drug cartels will not take this lightly, and they will be coming in with a lot of firepower, and so we have to make sure that we protect the contractors that are on the border building this particular fence. Now, out in the water, once we do the fence, we're going to have a vessel tracking system with buoys, and so that way you can track any vessel, because once you stop the land access, they're going to go to sea, and once you do that, then they're going to try the air assets. So that's the first part of a border security plan that we can put together. There are, in President-elect Trump's plan, there are 10 different items that he's talked about. Again, the first is the physical barrier, the layered security system. The second is end, catch, and release. You don't want to be able to have individuals come in and all of a sudden say, okay, I want amnesty. And then right now CBP is just taking their name and letting them go. That has to stop. Number three is zero tolerance for criminal aliens. And so Mr. Trump has talked about that, getting them out immediately. Number four, block funding for sanctuary cities. He talked about that. And then the other thing that you can do is go after, from DOJ, go after the individuals, the politicians who allow sanctuary cities. And when they say they're not going to enforce the law, then you go arrest them. Number five is cancel unconstitutional executive orders that President Obama has done. He's done a lot of them in this area, so they all have to be canceled. Number six, we have to suspend the issuance of visas to any place where adequate screening cannot occur, and that's particularly in the Middle East, Syria, those kind of countries. The seventh item is we want to ensure that countries take back their people when we order them deported. If a country will not take their citizens back, then we stop funding and we cut off relationships with them. Number eight, with number eight, we finally complete, we do the biometric entry and exit system. Number 9, we turn off the jobs and benefits for everybody who's coming in. And number 10, we want to reform legal immigration to serve the best interests of America and its workers. This is the most important item that President-elect Trump can do for all Americans to make America great again.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate your comments. Has G. Edward Griffin joined our program yet?
Mr. Griffin, if you're there, you may have yourself muted. I have one number that I haven't identified.
Hi, this is Lawrence Kogan.
Oh, Lawrence Kogan. Let's go ahead and go on with that. And Brenda, if you wouldn't mind, try to contact Mr. Griffin and see if he will get on the call. Larry Kogan, Lawrence Kogan is attorney, very knowledgeable attorney on international law, and he has been working on the water rights and the indigenous peoples and the acquisition of a lot of private land through things like the Klamath Dam and some of the environmental regulations. Larry, would you please tell President Trump what you would like to see changed and what you would like to help him with?
Thank you, Dan, very much, and I appreciate it being on your show in the past to speak about the Western issues that I've been addressing for clients, both on a legal and policy level. Dear President-elect Trump, out west we are encountering, that is, the farmers and ranchers of the West are encountering a new paradigm in which federal agencies led by the Interior Department are essentially revising U.S. Western history by providing legal recognition, implementation, and enforcement of pre-European discovery rights of Native Americans. These aboriginal rights include both land and water rights, and they relate to lands that the tribes had ceded to the U.S. government in exchange for Indian reservations, pursuant to Indian treaties. These aboriginal water rights bear a time immemorial priority date back to the caveman era that's supreme to all other water rights in Western states. The threat of Native American tribes exercising these rights harms irrigators' private land and water rights, their private property, which is protected and recognized by our United States Constitution. Unfortunately, Native American tribes are not subject to the United States Constitution because they are treated as pre-existing it. The exercise of these rights results in reduced water deliveries to farmers and ranchers operating on and off federal irrigation projects. Reduced water deliveries results in reduced agricultural harvests, the closure of multi-generational family farms, impoverishment. It also drives farms out of business, which results in a diminished supply of U.S. agricultural production and consequently greater dependence on foreign agricultural imports from third world nations with low food safety standards. These acts are consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which President Obama has not only embraced, but has shown how he has implemented by restoring Aboriginal lands and water rights back to Native American tribes. Number 2, Mr. President-elect, please stop the Interior Department and other federal agencies from enhancing Native American tribal sovereignty to 567 federally recognized tribes. This results in billions of federal dollars per year in congressional appropriation and federal agency contracts being dispensed to Native American tribes with little or no public accountability, either to Congress or to anybody else. Tribal members do not receive many of these funds. The tribal government and their council members live rather luxuriously while the tribal members live in poverty. We've encountered this in northwestern Montana with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, which earn billions of dollars in Defense Department contracts to clean up uranium tailing spills on Air Force bases, to procure aircraft replacement parts for the Saudi Arabian and Libyan Air Forces, among others, and also receive funds to provide software services to the Savannah, Georgia nuclear arms facilities. That's probably one of the reasons why the CSKT in Montana have attracted the attention of the Turkish government, which has worked over time more extensively in business dealings with the tribe. Tribal sovereignty has also enhanced the waiving of federal regulatory requirements by federal agencies. This is the reason why the Kerr Dam of the Flathead Indian Reservation in northwestern Montana was transferred to the CSKT in 2015. The tribe did not have to meet ordinary regulatory requirements for safety and for national security, as would a private contractor. The Kerr Dam is a black start dam that starts up on its own without the electric grid into Category 3, which means if it breaks, it destroys a lot and kills a lot of people. It's also located within 50 miles of the U.S.-Canada border. Enhanced tribal sovereignty also increases tribal non-accountability with respect to stewardship and management of Indian reservations. There are currently 365 Indian reservations throughout the United States, and there are no fewer than 12 Indian reservations that span the U.S.-Canada and the U.S.-Mexico borders, where there are few fences and few border patrol agents to monitor illegal crossings by potential terrorists, including terrorists from Iran, Syria, Libya, and other Middle Eastern nations which have ISIS and other al-Qaeda elements. It is understood that the Turkish government is engaged with Native American tribes and that Iran government is engaged on Indian reserves in Canada. The Canadian Immigration Service website has bragged about how it's resettled 25,000 Syrian refugees in Canada from November 2015 through February 2016. A map on that website shows that the 25,000 resettled refugees have resettled along the U.S.-Canada border on Indian reserves and Indian reservations in the U.S. that span the border. Mr. President, these are but a few of the issues your incoming administration can positively address to make America great again and safe for all Americans, including Native Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Do we have G. Edward Griffin on the line?
I did call his home. He's supposed to get on shortly. Just I'll let you know when he arrives.
Okay, that's fine. Our next speaker is Mr. Jim White. Jim started, founded, and still has Northwest Liberty News, one of the true patriot liberty groups reporting that is not media. And Jim is heavily involved in the freedom movement throughout the western United States. Jim, welcome to the show.
Dan, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on. What a great program with really an all-star lineup of guests, and I'm honored to be included. I traveled a couple of times over the summer down to Nevada and looked in the eyes of the ranchers down there. If I had an opportunity to have an audience with President like Trump, I would say what some of the other fine guests have said earlier is I would eliminate these agencies that have literally perpetrated tyranny upon good, hard-working, salt-of-the-earth Americans. I think we should end organizations like the BLM. We should end organizations, or at least really investigate organizations like the Forest Service, EPA, all these organizations that really, special interests have used, and certainly the environmental agencies have used sort of as a vice grip on because you can't really defend, the average person can't defend themselves against these agencies that have unlimited amounts of money. So that's one of the things. I traveled through, as I said, and looked into the eyes of these ranchers through Nevada twice over the summer, and I really felt for these ladies and these men, these gentlemen, and these ranchers that have really been basically really railroaded, I guess, for lack of better terms. That's one of the things I'd like to do. Also, in 1983, Reagan declared the year of the Bible. I think that this country could use that again in 2017. I think that we can, we need to build that wall as he talked about, and I think we need to put on the other side, put copies of the Ten Commandments. When people come here, they understand, what we stand for. So those are the things, really. I think, Dan. I think, basically, just do what you say you're going to do, because that would be very refreshing, because that doesn't happen these days. I know we're running late on time, and I want to give other people an opportunity. But, Dan, I really, really appreciate you giving me the opportunity, and thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I appreciate your allowing some of our other guests to be able to speak on the program. Is Bill Coate on the line? Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am, Dan. You got me?
Okay, great. Bill is a retired bird colonel in U.S. Marine Corps, once a Marine, always a Marine, and Bill was the commandant of the Marine Corps Intelligence Training School. And Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to ad-lib a little bit here. You've had so much great speakers and so much information this past night. Rather than overlap, I'll try and not beat a dead horse on the floor too much. But I really applaud President-elect Trump's love for our country and how he's reinstituted this patriotic feeling that we have for our country, and how he
is very keen on reestablishing U.S. sovereignty with America First policies. But I think we're missing one leg of the stool there, and I think that, Joseph Stalin said America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is threefold. It's patriotism, it's morality, and it's spiritual life. If we can undermine these three, America will collapse from within. And it seems like in our country we would kick the God out of the public square. And furthermore, I'd say that government corruption seems to be epidemic in our nation. There seems to be little or no personal accountability for elected officials and those in government. And we've watched where those in power have largely been immune to the same laws that Congress and the federal bureaucracies have put in place for the American citizens. I think that government needs to set the example for morality and virtue in our country. And I think that that's something that Jim just mentioned, that, that has to be part of our making America great again. We know that the U.S. Constitution, John Adams said, our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people and wholly unsuited for any other. And it's because in order to live in freedom, man has to control himself. And what I've seen is that most people today are afraid of the government, and they have good cause. I think it was over a year ago I read a Heritage Foundation article that said that Congress has put in 4,500 criminal laws and federal statutes. But even worse than that, our bureaucracies have put over 300,000 criminal regulations into federal code. And so people have a very good reason to fear the government. I think I read once that the average citizen commits about 3 felonies a day. And when we have this surveillance state that's collecting all of your data, you can imagine how easily it would be for a government to build a case against a private citizen. And I think that probably the biggest threat to what President-elect Trump wants to do is going to be the insanely bloated bureaucracy that we see today. We used to laugh when we'd say in the government bureaucracy that if one person can do the job well, then 10 can do it better. And the system's designed for bureaucrats to be promoted based on the easiest path to promotion is how many people you have working for you. And we have this budget cycle that drives our programs, and every year they need more money and they need more people. So I think that even though, I'm not going to paint every government bureaucrat and everybody who works for the government as dead wood, but there's a large amount of that. We have millions of people employed by the federal government. And I think that over the course of the years, I've heard politicians talk about a freeze in government hiring. Getting rid of the regulations is going to be difficult, but reducing the size of the federal government, not as difficult. And I think rather than freezing hiring, there needs to be a mandated decrease in the size of the government. And, for example, if President-elect Trump said we're going to decrease the size of government by 5% a year, that first year, most of these agencies are going to eliminate positions that aren't filled anyway. And eventually they'll have to start eliminating positions. But they can do that through attrition and through retirement. If we really want to roll back regulations, we need to roll back the regulators. And it seems that we've kind of reached that point. Benjamin Franklin said only a virtuous people are capable of freedom.
15 seconds.
As a nation becomes corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. So my advice is to get at the meat of the issue and reduce the size of the bureaucracy. Oh, Dan, thanks a lot for this. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Bill, and thank you for your insights. Is Cliff Gardner on the call yet? Cliff, are you there?
Yes, I am, Dan.
Also, Mr. Griffin has arrived.
Okay, good. Well, Ed, you stay on hold. I'm going to put Cliff Gardner on, and you'll be the last.
Okay, I'm standing by. Thank you, Dan. My message will be short. We, that is my family and friends here in northern Nevada, ask that President-elect Trump contact the Justice Department immediately, even before being seated as president, and demand that the Bundys and their supporters no longer be held and treated as political prisoners. The Bundys and their supporters were found innocent when tried in Oregon and will very likely be found innocent when tried in Nevada. In America, no one should be treated as guilty until proven so. And I think we all agree that these people have been incarcerated and punished long enough, and they should be home with their families during the holidays. So I urge everybody in this effort to do what they can. It'll solve many of our problems. And again, call attention to this dilemma. And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Cliff, and I could not agree more. We need to return our land to the American farmers and ranchers that were there and have provided our food and our clothing for all these generations, and we need to leave the ranchers and the farmers alone. They don't need to be regulated out of existence. Finally, our final speaker is Mr. G. Edward Griffin, and Ed, I've referred to you as the patriarch of the freedom movement. So with that said, please welcome to the show, and would like to see hear your insights when talking to President-elect Trump.
Well, thanks for that, Dan. Patriarch, I guess, sounds pretty good. That's better than icon or some of the other things I've been called. But, yeah, this is an occasion because when you asked me to spend 5 minutes to give advice or offer advice to Mr. Trump and his team, I got to thinking, how do you do that? And what would I do is what I finally came up with. If I had been elected president of the United States, what kind of advice would I give to myself? What would I do that would be within my constitutional authority? The one thing that bothers me is that sometimes I've heard people say, well, I would just throw these people in jail, or I would stop this program and so forth, and I'd realize that, wait a minute, if you're a real constitutionalist, you don't have the power to do any of those things, even though they need to be done. We have to work through Congress. Remember that thing called the Constitution? So asking myself, what would I focus on if I were not spotted, it became pretty clear that I see that there are three general areas that need serious attention. One is our monetary system, one is our national sovereignty, and the other is this rising issue of civil unrest. Those are the things that I would want to turn to as president, and I hope Mr. Trump will. Regarding the monetary system, of course, we know that the Federal Reserve System is really at the heart of all the problems. It's a central bank. It's a private cartel. It's really become the tail that wags the dog. And those of us who have been following this for years are hardcore, and we know in our hearts that the Federal Reserve eventually has to be abolished if we hope to have a sound monetary system again. And we know also, I would know as a new president, that that's a little bit too much for the public at the present time. The average person isn't ready yet. That's not a realistic goal. They think that the Federal Reserve still serves some positive function. So anyway, in spite of that, I think what I would do as president is to follow the theme that none of these bankers are too big to jail, and the banks are not too big to fail. We've got to hold people accountable for the crimes they've committed in the banking field. That I think is a primary area of focus. We've got to get the banks off of the backs of the taxpayers. No more bailouts, no more bail-ins. We have to make the banks competitive. We have to treat them like any other business without any favoritism, without any special tax subsidies. Let them compete, let them provide a service, and let them fail if they are corrupt or if they fail to conduct business efficiently. And we move on to sovereignty. Well, take a look at all of the trade treaties and other treaties that have encumbered our sovereignty. And most people don't realize that with all of this talk about treaties, we're talking about national independence and sovereignty. And I think that as a new president, I would focus on doing everything possible to make sure that other countries no longer dictate to America what it must do in terms of the economy, in terms of trade, manufacturing, the environment, military action, monetary policy, employment, immigration, or anything else that should be the sole prerogative of a sovereign nation. That's very important. So I think to do that, we have to reject I would reject anybody from my administration who participated in the old globalist regime, the old school that wants to put the United States secondary to the world. That includes any member of the CFR, the Trilateralists, the Bilderbergers, or any other key player in the Obama administration or the Clinton team. And then finally, the civil unrest. It's funded, let's face it. We all know the civil unrest that's growing in America today is funded by certain people who are part of this old team. They're wealthy components of the globalist team. They want to destabilize America and pit one group against another to divide and conquer. So I think the top priority for me as president, if I had that job, and I hope Mr. Trump sees it as a top priority, is to charge people like George Soros and those in the tax-exempt foundations who are funding violent mob action based on divisions on race and religion and gender and lifestyle or any other basis. Violence is not a protected constitutional right, and these people must be stopped. So those are my thoughts, and I hope it makes sense. I wish Mr. Trump and his team the best in a very tough job that lies ahead, and we're all behind you and rooting for you.
Thank you, Ed, and I really do believe that that's exactly how we all feel. I believe that we all recognize that we have one last chance to make this country really, truly come back to the roots that made us great. And I would, that's the end of our guest lineup. I would like to close the program with a prayer, and I hope that our listeners will please spread the message that we came out with this afternoon, and please share our website and our information with others. So with that, dear Lord, our Heavenly Father, we come to you in gratitude and thanksgiving for giving us one last chance to restore the miracle of freedom known as the United States of America. We know that our national heritage is a Christian heritage and understand that we cannot survive as a free republic without your guidance and your blessing. Lord, we are thankful for the vision of liberty given by you to our founding fathers and vowed to learn, understand, and protect the blessings of liberty that you bestowed upon our great Christian nation. Lord, we thank you for this Thanksgiving blessing of liberty and pray that you will guide the footsteps and actions of President Trump. Protect him from the evil that would destroy his dream of freedom and help him to make America a great and Christian beacon of freedom again. This we pray in Christ Jesus' name. Amen. With that, folks, I thank you for joining us on this radio show, and I ask that you join us again next week, and we thank you for the time to listen. God bless. Thank you. Good night.
Dan, thank you very much, and all of your guests that you brought on tonight. You know, it's said that wisdom comes from many minds, and we've heard had some great input tonight. So thank you for all that you do for spreading the truth and for being a beacon of light and hope to this nation. Mick, thank you very much for allowing us to come on and to take these 2 hours, and it's greatly appreciated.
Well, it's my obligation as an American, man, to make this thing happen. And so as the owner and the founder of the SBN network, man, we thank the Republic for standing up and re-inhabiting and educating the people on what is real and what it is. And like everybody said, I hope that President Trump stands true to what he says and what he can do, because we know that's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a struggle all the way. But as long as he recognizes that there is a republic and there is the people, and I think he'll do exactly what he says he'll do. And I want to thank all the guests, and what an amazing lineup. I'm telling you, it's totally awesome. All I got to say is, wow.
A lot to think about there.
Well, I mean, I'm thankful for a lot of things, but what I am thankful for this season is I'm thankful that the Republic does have a voice, and many voices, as we heard tonight. And that it will continue, and will continue to grow, and will continue to make America great again.
If you want to know more about the Republic, go to the www.republicfortheunitedstates.org. There's a support link and a link that you can receive email updates for further information coming from the Republic. There's also a great book out if you want to really get into the documentation and footnotes. It's called Re-Inhabited, and you can go to reinhabited.com. There's Volume 1 and Volume 2 that have just come out this year, and they have received accolades from many people of esteem that have reviewed it. And so I thank you again, Mick, and all your guests that came on tonight. God bless you, and have a happy
Now, they can also catch Dan Hathel on Thursday nights, right?
That's right, yeah. Dan's Connected Dots show. It comes on every Thursday night at Republic News Network. You can get those details off the website, republicfortheunitedstates.org.
God bless America and one nation under God.
God bless the Republic. Have a happy Thanksgiving.